World Insight. Virus on lockdown. A health expert at the Davos Forum lays down the facts on viruses and ways to contain them.
If you have a certain percentage of cases that are super spreaders, you can have massive amplification of an epidemic very quickly.
And the Ghanaian president up close and personal on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum.
Hello and welcome to Davos Insight, our special program coming from this Swiss mountain town, Tian. We begin back at home in China with the latest on efforts to contain the coronavirus. Transportation has been suspended in 3 cities in Hubei Province. Wuhan, the city hardest hit with the outbreak, has suspended outbound air and train travel. As of Thursday morning, authorities say over 600 cases has been confirmed globally. 17 people died. Almost 5,000 people are under medical observation after having close contact with infected patients. And these numbers are being updated as our program airs. As the outbreak is causing concern around the world, I talked to Richard Hatchett, who is the CEO of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI. He told me what the coronavirus is and how coronavirus is likely being spread right now, and whether there is already super, as they say, super spreader in the world today. What the global health community can do to stop the outbreak. Let's take a listen. Dr. Hatchett, what a pleasure to have you here on the World Economic Forum.
Thank you, Wei. It's nice to be here.
As we speak, there's a public health crisis going on right now, the coronavirus, which we do not know much about. So, sir, from your decades dealing with academic disease, what do you make of the current stage? What's the most important thing?
Well, there's a lot that we do not know, but I am very concerned by what we do know. What we know is this novel coronavirus, and coronaviruses are a class of virus that have caused very serious diseases in the past, such as SARS and MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. What we do know is a novel coronavirus has emerged. It probably emerged into human populations just a couple of months ago. Well, and we suspect that there are a lot of cases that we don't know about. So this is a very rapidly expanding epidemic, and it's already expanded to other countries. So it's very concerning.
And now, how do you think about the speed? You know, given what we know, can we be able to understand the speed with which it could be spreading?
It's very difficult at the beginning of an epidemic when you don't have much information about a new virus or a new disease to get a full grip on these issues. Scientists are working, you know,
with
24 hours, 7,
and things like that.
And with models to understand that. I think what we can say is that the epidemic is expanding very rapidly. It's expanding both in terms of numbers of cases and in terms of its geographic spread. We already know from the descriptions that we've got today, we know there's a wide spectrum of illness. So we know that it can be very severe, and there have been fatalities. And we know that, but there are also cases that are fairly mild. The concern with a virus that can cause severe illness and death, but that also causes mild illness, is that the people who have mild cases of illness may not even think that they have the new virus. They may continue to go about their daily business spreading the disease, making it very, very difficult to contain, which could result in a global expansion of the disease.
Because this is the flu season. I mean, so many people have the symptoms, you know, running noses, coughing, and little fever, things like that, not feeling comfy. But that is even more difficult to think, isn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's a season of colds and flus. People are used to being sick at this time. They're used to going about their business. And it gives an opportunity to a new microbe to spread almost surreptitiously in a population before we recognize that we're dealing with something new. And I think that's probably what's happened here.
On the other hand, people are extremely concerned about this super spreader. meaning those people who carry the virus and sick, or sometimes not sick, but could cause others around sick in an enormous amount of number and could cause also death in a devastating way. What about that?
That's a real concern with coronaviruses. We've seen that phenomenon with SARS. We saw it with MERS. It's been an important mechanism for propagating epidemics. Unfortunately, we have at least one instance that we know about with the novel coronavirus where this has already happened. And so by report, there was a patient who infected perhaps as many as 14 or 15 healthcare workers in a single case. If you have a certain percentage of cases that are super spreaders,
that's right,
you can have massive amplification of an epidemic very quickly, and that's really frightening.
So what is the thing for people to bear in mind now? I mean, we all know now, wash your hands very well, and also wear masks. But still, people travel. This is the travel season, Spring Festival, as you know, the Chinese Lunar New Year. And still, people travel because we have globalization. And we know virus beyond borders. So, Dr. Hatchett, we are feeling desperate about what to do now.
My understanding is that Chinese authorities have begun to make some recommendations.
Very clearly.
Very clear recommendations about limiting travel from Wuhan and limiting travel if people are ill.
Yeah.
You know, we certainly hope that would reduce the geographic spread of the disease. Unfortunately, what we also know is that with diseases that have this wide spectrum of illness, from very mild to very severe, it is very difficult to control their geographic spread. I think we need to continue to study this virus. We need to learn more about how it's transmitted. We need to learn more about the illness. We need to learn more about how infectious people are and when they're infectious. And as we gather that information, we'll be able to develop more directed, more appropriate recommendations.
Right. Having said that, though, Dr. Hatchett, as you know, the genetic data of this virus is already being publicized.
Yes.
At the time when this has become a public health concern from China. And internationally, it is known. So with what speed do you think, given the previous experiences, researchers around the world will be able to dig into this virus and use their experiences earlier and be able to do something about that?
Well, the scientists have already started. I mean, and let me first say, you know, it is to China's credit for their transparency about what's going on. It is to China's credit that they have released those sequences, because that enables the entire global scientific community to begin to work on this threat.
Right.
There have been analyses done of the genetic sequences. We know that this is a virus that is related to SARS, but I wouldn't say that it's closely related to SARS. And there are discussions ongoing. You're probably aware, 15 years ago, there were efforts to develop SARS vaccines.
Yes.
There are discussions going on about how can we look at some of the SARS vaccine candidates that were developed to see if they might possibly protect against this virus. A lot of people are skeptical that they will protect. They don't think they will, but we need to evaluate that. And that's already, those discussions are already underway. And we're working very closely with WHO. CEPI is an organization that was set up to develop vaccines, and we're working closely with WHO and partners, you know, and we'll be making some announcements shortly, not yet, but we'll be making some announcements shortly about some of our own vaccine development activities. We're aware of a number of companies that, you know, at their own risk have begun to undertake vaccine development, which is critically important. The concern with diseases like this virus, again, that have this wide spectrum of disease, because they're so difficult to contain using isolation or quarantine, you know, that leaves you with a very limited set of tools to control their impact on society. One set of tools in the field, we call them non-pharmaceutical interventions. These are things like closing schools, you know, preventing mass gatherings, you know, asking people not to travel, for example. those can be very disruptive. They have huge economic impact. They can't be undertaken lightly, and it's difficult to sustain them for very long. If you cannot do that, that leaves you with developing vaccines or developing therapeutics as the other available tool.
Right.
And developing vaccines or developing therapeutics can take a long time. So that's...
And it's not guaranteed whether you will have it or not, depending on the cases, in fact.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, I do want to ask you about this, because earlier, 17 years ago, I remember very clearly there was the SARS. Mm-hmm. And then there was also the Ebola, which is apparently much more devastating than what we have right now, with the coronavirus this time. So what have we learned, do you think, in those two critical cases, with a lot of human lives lost, in fact, that can be applied right now?
I think one of the things that we have learned through these various experiences is the criticality of global cooperation to work together to mobilize the world scientific community to address all of the different aspects of development of diagnostics, the development of therapeutics, the development of vaccines, the understanding of epidemiology. That's critical.
Yeah.
And the WHO is leading that effort and leading the coordination effort, and I really want to say they're doing a great job. It's a very difficult situation. There's very limited information.
And they have to react very fast.
They have to react and make decisions very quickly.
Right.
I think, you know, in addition to the global cooperation, the transparency between countries is critically important.
And even within countries.
And even within countries, sharing between health authorities within countries.
That's right.
When SARS happened, that was not really a well-established norm. And the information sharing took longer. Yes. And there was a longer delay between the first cases and the global recognition of an outbreak. In this case, it's remarkable. You know, the outbreak started in December. The global community was notified at the end of December, and there has been good sharing of information over the last several weeks. Yeah. So I think,
and the genetic data already known.
And the genetic data is already known, and vaccine development's already started. The virus has already been isolated. Yeah. The sequences have been shared.
There is a frustration among the general public. People look at vaccine as one of the solutions. But why so slow? I mean, this is the general impression people have. Of course, for health workers, people like you, you need to be 100% certain almost before you apply it to the market. But on the other hand, the virus changes so fast. So is the vaccine still significant at all? People would ask.
Well,
even for the general flu also.
So the flu is a great example. It's the one example where we develop a new vaccine every single year. Yeah. And we have developed the capability to develop a new vaccine every single year because we get a new flu virus every single year.
That's true.
And the regulatory agencies, and this is really a critical point, the regulatory agencies, because that's the problem, they've adapted their processes to allow the development of a new vaccine every single year. I mentioned that long list of diseases.
That's right.
We're seeing new emerging diseases almost every year, every other year, every 3 years. I mean, there's not a long interval between these new diseases. And
only bigger or smaller outbreaks,
yeah,
right?
Bigger or smaller outbreaks, more or less severe diseases. The world and the regulatory agencies need to recognize that this is the new normal. And it's a function of the world we live in, and there's lots of reasons we can go into as to why that's the case. But if that's the new normal, we need to have frameworks and technologies in place like we have for flu, where if we need to develop a new vaccine every single year, we can do it. And we cannot do that right now. And that's a real problem. And that
a systematic approach, as you say,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Where are we lacking in that systematic approach?
Well, I think historically, vaccine development has taken a long time. It's very expensive. It's very risky. And so companies have only wanted to undertake vaccine development for big problems.
Right.
You know, for measles, for mumps, for rubella.
That makes business sense, right?
It makes good business sense. If you leave it to the private sector, things are going to be done that make good business sense. For emerging diseases where you've got a brand new disease every year, there's not going to be a market that's going to drive the development of technologies that have the attributes that we need, which are speed of developing a new candidate vaccine,
Yeah.
speed of scaling the manufacturing, speed in terms of producing immunity very rapidly after you give the vaccine. The market doesn't value those attributes for day-to-day vaccines for routine diseases. So what we need, and it's actually one of the reasons that my organization was created, is a way to couple public sector investment with private sector innovation.
Yeah, PPP in a way.
A public-private partnership, exactly, to foster the development of the technologies that have the attributes that we need.
But no, Dr. Hatchett, I certainly understand what you're talking about. Particularly right now, everybody would understand the importance of what you're talking about. But not
particularly right now.
Particularly right now, but not in the ordinary days. In the
Yeah.
ordinary days, people's priorities seem to change all the time. And geopolitics, uncertainties, what about AI? All of this is controlling where we are going, but not our health. So, sir, there is a devastating dilemma that we only notice what is the most important about us at the most critical crisis.
I think that's right, and you mentioned AI. I would add to that list climate change. I would add cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I would add epidemic diseases. They're
all important.
They're all important. They have some commonalities. These are all problems that are transnational. They are collective action problems that cannot be left to the private sector to resolve through market mechanisms,
right,
because the market won't drive the solutions that we need. And I think that set of problems, they have a common set of attributes, and if we could begin to learn from solutions that are developed, the other problem is that the people who are working on climate change are not thinking about cybersecurity, and they're not thinking about epidemic disease.
No, we're not linked in that way.
Linked.
Yeah. So we better be able to put our wisdom together, right, sir?
Well, and that's, I mean, we're here at Davos, right? I mean, and that's one of the things that the World Economic Forum is great at doing, is cross-fertilizing communities and ideas. It's actually one of the important things that happens here. We do need to be able to do that, and we need to think about these problems in a different way. Thinking about epidemic disease, it shouldn't be put in the scales with all the other health problems. It shouldn't be balanced against what are you going to invest in cancer, what are you going to invest against HIV, what are you going to invest against TB, and what's going to be left over for epidemic disease. It needs to be put into the pot with these transnational problems, and it needs to be addressed as a separate kind of security issue.
But Dr. Hatchett, if I can, sadly, geopolitics these days are driving our cooperation apart. At least there's a tendency about that.
Yeah.
I mean, as a scientist yourself, and you earlier work for government, you know how things work. What do you make of that reality?
It's a tremendous challenge because, in saying that these are collective action problems and require multilateral solutions, this is not an era of multilateralism. And you're exactly right. And there are things that are driving wedges between governments, and governments have to be part of that collective solution. They're not the only part of it. I mean, it's got to be the private sector, it's got to be the non-governmental sector, but it also has to be government, because government has very important tools available to it in terms of financing, in terms of regulatory mechanisms. And if we can't get governments to work together and develop common solutions, I mean, that's just speaking about regulatory. Let me just take a tangent for a second. The problem currently is that there are many regulatory systems governing the development of vaccines or drugs across the world.
Which is understandable because there are national borders.
Which is understandable, but they're not harmonized. And so they're maladapted to a problem like the novel coronavirus, where you have something that's happening very quickly, the entire world is at risk, and you don't want the people that are developing the solutions to have to go to 12 or 15 or 18 different regulatory agencies. They cannot do that. So there has to be a new paradigm for thinking about global regulation of products to address epidemic threats.
We have a lot of things to do. In fact, let's not just focus on the little things, selfish geopolitics, but bigger issues. Before you go, one final question for you, sir.
Sure.
Cross-border. We have also noticed there are cases in Japan, South Korea, Thailand, even in the United States, where you originally are from. So what about for the national CDCs in these countries? how do they control their borders, and how to educate their own public? Sir, any suggestion?
Well, the national CDCs actually are pretty good about communicating with each other. You know, the public health community is pretty good at thinking about what the collective good is. In terms of managing borders, we thought about this a lot when we were worried about pandemic influenza.
Yes.
Pandemic influenza is a disease that can be transmitted between people who don't even know that they're sick. And it's thought that people can even have what's, you know, asymptomatic transmission. So a person can come across the border, and even if you've got the world's best fever screening, people are still going to come across the border. And because of how quickly influenza increases in size in terms of epidemics, you could stop 99% of the people with flu from coming across your border, and you would only delay the epidemic by about 10 days. So the concern with this novel coronavirus is if there are people that are getting sick, but just very mildly sick, they won't be picked up by that screening. So closing down borders or doing super aggressive screening is not going to stop the global transmission of the virus. And if that's the case, and even if you did heroic efforts to screen and do all these things, and it's only going to slow the virus down by a couple of weeks, imposing that cost on yourself is, in almost most instances, thought to not be worth the cost.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hatchett, for your advice. Be healthy, and really appreciate your expertise.
Wait, thank you so much for having me on the show.